Here's Broadway Maven co-host Mateo Chavez Lewis on the pop influences on Little Shop of Horrors.
We've seen that Alan Menken and Howard Ashman chose to use doo-wop music and 50s and 60s popular music rather than use music that was traditionally more Broadway. And so the way that they did that was at the beginning of the show we get a lot more like 50s and 60s popular music, a lot more doo-wop, a lot more, like they said, the dark side of Grease. And then as the show goes on, it gradually kind of moves forward in time in this like descent into the hellscape that is like intense 80s synths and disco and stuff. So it starts off, right? We start off with this like big blaring orchestral synth thing that feels very 80s, feels very like Phantom of the Opera. Right? And this is actually the theme from Don't Feed the Plants, which is the finale. So it kind of, we're doing this big circle. We're starting kind of where we end musically. And we have a narrator telling us this is what happened on the 21st day of the month of September in an early year of a decade not too long before our own. Right? This music underscores the introduction. And then we kind of flash back to how it all started. But the narrator at the very beginning knows how it ends. And it ends with all these synths and stuff in Don't Feed the Plants. So that's what we first get. And then that ends right away and we go into...
For more on free weekly Broadway appreciation classes, visit thebroadwaymaven.com.
Which is classic 50s, like late 40s, early 50s doo-wop. Like, first of all, it's the repeated chords, right, in the piano up here. And it's also all major triads, which are the simplest kind of chord, right? There's C major, then F major, and G major, which are like the three simplest chords on the piano. And that's all it is. And then you have the Ronettes, who are like a play on the Supremes and like black girl groups who sang in harmony at that point. You have them come out and sing in tight 3-part harmony, a little bit like a la gospel, a little bit a la like Diana Ross, like that style. So totally borrowing from those kinds of very like wholesome pop music. And it continues into Grow For Me, which is one of the next songs, and the one where he tells the story, Sha-whoop, or whatever it's called. I'm totally blanking on the name. It's some whoopsie-doo. It's some noise like that, which is also very 50s to name your song like Sha-whoop or doo-wop or whatever. But that's like...
I do.
Yeah. It's these repeated chords. Again, just triads, right? Very simple chords, repeated in the piano. And then the chord progression is one you'll recognize. Right? If I just take out all this bass stuff and just play the chords. Right? Like one of the most iconic like 50s chord progressions from this style of like I said, very wholesome bubblegum kind of pop, which is 1, the first chord of the key, then the 6th chord minor, then the 4th chord, then the 5th chord. So we call it 1, 6 minor, 4, 5, and that just repeats over and over. So that's the same for Dadu. It's the same for Grow For Me, right? Uses a variation on that with the high. With the really high repeated chords in the piano. And then things start getting a little bit more interesting after that. We have the dentist, right? Who is kind of a play on Elvis in the way he talks and the way his music is constructed. When I was younger, just a bad little kid, my mama noticed funny things I did. You know, like that has Elvis vibes. So now we're starting to get away from wholesome doo-wop 50s and into like rock and roll 50s and 60s with the dentist. And then Feed Me comes along, right? This is when the plant starts talking to Seymour for the first time, and the music totally shifts. It's been very lovely, and the most kind of dangerous and dirty music we've gotten so far is the dentist song, right? Now we have this. Right? So this is very funky blues. It's funk because it has this like repeated bass line that's really groovy and has a lot of rhythm in it, right? Feed me. And then it's also blues because listen to these notes. That's all blues piano using the blues scale. Right? And then what the plant is actually singing, feed me Seymour, feed me all night long. That's also in the blues scale. Long run. Instead of in a major scale or a standard pop major scale would be long. Instead he sings long. So it's like lower, it's digging into all the pitches. There's, riffing. There's where he changes notes on the same word. Feed me Seymour, feed is 2 notes. Me see is also 2 notes, right? And all of these scoops, more, these vocal inflections that you wouldn't see in this kind of music. So we're getting darker, we're getting more gritty, we're getting more dirty, we're getting more hip, and we're moving towards 80s music slowly. Then we have in Act 2, right, we have Suddenly Seymour, right, the very classic ballad. And this is actually very classic 70s piano ballad. If you look at like What I Did for Love from a chorus line, it's very similar. If you look at a lot of Billy Joel ballads, right, they all have these like arpeggios, which is what it's called when you play a chord on the piano, but you play it one note at a time. Instead of I could play it like that, just solid. But Billy Joel likes to do a lot of arpeggios, which is the fancy word for breaking up the chord, right? And that's what makes that sound, and it's very classic Billy Joel. Like, think of the opening to New York State of Mind, right? Which I don't know how to play off the top of my head, but it's like, if you know New York State of Mind by Billy Joel, it's all whatever the chords are, but it's that style, where every note is separate. And so we're getting into now the 70s rock with Billy Joel, with Suddenly Seymour. And then things kind of explode with like The Meek Shall Inherit, where Seymour has his big solo. My future's starting, I've got to let it stick with that plant and G, my bank account will thrive. What am I saying? No way, forget it. It's much too dangerous to keep that plant alive. Right? We're using these big epic chords, and we're getting synths, right? We're getting drama, we're getting drums, we're getting like all of these like electronic instruments, which feels like the final countdown, like it feels like 80s rock and roll. And so now at this really dark moment, everything is sounding like the 80s. And at the end again, we come back to Don't Feed the Plants, which starts with this, which we remember from the beginning. Subsequent to the events you have just witnessed. And we go into this very like epic driving 80s rock anthem with synths and drums and bass and everything that is sounding like, you know, it sounds like Europe, it sounds like Journey, it sounds like like 80s rock and roll. And so this kind of descent from the very like wholesome pop music of the 50s and 60s, we see every single kind of era of pop music in succession in the score of this show, so that we end in the 80s, which is when this the music that was kind of popular at the time that this show was written. And it's a commentary on like how all of society kind of descends into corruption and capitalism and all of these things that like that the plant represents greed and anger and all of these things that the plant represents, that we've kind of descended into since the very, very wholesome time of the 50s and 60s. And so that's how the musical journey of the show mirrors the journey of society and mirrors the journey of Seymour. Back to you, David.
Terrific, thank you. And here's another video I think you'll like.